Good afternoon, friends. We are preparing to go ahead with the 6 stages of discipleship, and we are on stage number 4, Chela on the thread. It is an unusual stage, and it's really the beginning of a greater ashramic intimacy. The true candidate for this stage has self-effacement, self-forgetfulness, focus on the immediate task, and somehow the ability to look from afar, that is, from the position of the soul. He is, as it says here in our little segue, he is decentralized and engrossed in the fulfillment of the divine plan to the best of his ability, which means that he's not terribly concerned about what the master thinks of him and what the ashram thinks of him. In fact, he is engaged like the more senior members of the ashram with the divine plan and making it a reality. It is the reward, if I might so express it, of the worker who knows what he has come into incarnation to do, and who is endeavoring with dedication to do it. Now, DK says we can't really prepare ourselves, train ourselves for this stage. It's a natural outgrowth of accepted discipleship. And if we have achieved the state in which the driving urge of our life is the need of humanity and the expanding awareness of the immediate next step that man as a whole must take, then perhaps we will find ourselves as a Chela on the thread, developing certain psychic abilities and able to call upon the master at will in the case of group emergency, but apparently not in case of individual personal emergency. The Tibetan tells us that we must learn to handle those particular problems. Now we're on page 747, and this is program 9 of the 6 stages of discipleship video commentary. And maybe this program, I think, will be perhaps one of the shorter ones. Yesterday's program was 3 hours in length, but I don't have the time right now to do that. Now, DK is going on, telling us always important matters. If you think about it, and sometimes, well, often I do, where would we get such trustworthy information as this that tells us how to conduct our lives so we can truly achieve greater ashramic intimacy. I think it would be very difficult to find the caliber that is here given by the Tibetan. Of course, different masters will have their way. But in terms of this breadth of perspective, well, it's rare indeed. Just want to make sure I'm in the right place here. Otherwise, I can go on talking and you won't be seeing what I'm talking about. It does happen. The major tasks of the master when the disciple first enters his ashram, which I think we can think of as the stage of accepted discipleship. The master does take control, or at least he is a prevailing influence. That major task is to make him, the disciple, think along the lines of decentralization. As we pointed out, there's much of the number 4 in decentralization, and it applies very much to personality centeredness, which seems to be inevitable as we progress through the different stages of personality focus. This involves the shift in the disciple's consciousness from himself to the work to be done. And incidentally, the answering of these of the questions. So decentralization. Think about that for a moment in your own life. It's hard at first to think in broader terms and in deeper terms. And although it is much repeated as advice, it is hard to take the eyes off the little personal self and put them squarely upon the work to be done within any ashram. I think there's quite a struggle in the transference of the vision from one's little personal self to much larger transcendental, impersonal, pan-human issues. It's almost like a reflex response that the eyes go to the little personal self. But as we progress, they don't have to go there. A much bigger picture of humanity and the world in which it lives comes into the consciousness, and the affairs of the little lower self really do begin to shrink in their magnetism. And then we can start to become truly useful. So we have some questions here. And incidentally, he says, the answering of the following questions. Now, this really is taking place, as it were, in the ashram or at the periphery of the ashram. And we could see Master DK trying to help his students achieve this attitude. I seem to recall a statement at one point where he said, "Never for a moment do you forget your self or little self." I guess it is a preoccupation with a number of people, and certainly with average humanity, which has to be trained to seek a newer way, which is less self-centered. So here are the questions. Do you, in reality, know what your life task is? Well, I think there's a lot of people, I know them too, and they are very good people, and they help here and there in ways that may help to bring the plan forward, but they can't really answer in the affirmative this question. Do you in reality know what your life task is? Number two, have you tried to carry this out in your current life processes? Because maybe there are some people who feel, well, I know what my life task is, and I would get on with it if only I weren't so, and then come the list of excuses. If I weren't so blocked by my environment, by my responsibilities, by my necessity to make a living, there's all kinds of excuses, which prevent us, or at least seem to prevent us, from carrying out this life task. Number 3, is your main objective the building of character and the development of purity? If this is so, do you not think that you should be on the path of probation and not deluding yourself with the idea that you are on the path of discipleship? Because, you know, a minimum of noble character or upstanding character and a minimum of purity is certainly required of the true disciple. Now, he might, you know, be asking these very questions of those who are accepted disciples, but he wants them to register consciously how the path of accepted discipleship or higher presents different tasks than those that should preoccupy his attention on the path of probation. Goes on. Are you, number 4, are you preoccupied with human need? We remember for Chela on the thread, this was a requirement. Are you preoccupied with human need? Or are you engrossed with your own position as a disciple, with your own spiritual problems, and with the delusion of the terrific difficulties in your personal life? Well, there are so many people who don't know what their life task is, have not been successful in carrying it out, have still much to do really of a foundational nature, building character and purity, and who are preoccupied with themselves. Now, none of this would be really possible for a true Chela on the thread. A lot of decentralization has occurred, and much impersonality, and much task centrality, and much skill in handling life problems from a higher perspective. He really says it's true here. It is a delusion. The terrific, so-called terrific, difficulties in your personal life, we have to learn to treat that personality as the instrument that it really is. And we cannot identify with it so spontaneously, so reflexively. So it's a moment of truth. He asks us, please examine our preoccupations, and get on with your life task without blocking your own way by failing in the ways that these suggestions or questions hint. So the shift of the disciple's consciousness from himself to the work to be done. Now, the progress is probably slow, and there will be almost inevitably a period of centralization as the personality per se becomes more and more integrated. As long as you believe, says the Tibetan, that your life is one of all-engrossing interest and also one of exceeding hard places, because relatively it isn't. You are only in the very early stages of accepted discipleship and have not cast off ancient habits of thought. Exceeding hard places. It's maybe a form of self-pity, actually. Whoop. And all of these stages, of course, they have, in a way, their beginning, middle, and end. It seems to me, when I was studying the people accepted for accepted discipleship, that many of them were still relatively in the early stages. And there was a sprinkling of those who had a little greater experience. So how much vigilance is indeed required of us to make sure that we do not fall victim to the snares which await any beginner in any stages, any of the real stages of work. I guess maybe we're all in a hurry, and maybe it's because on Earth a lot of time has been wasted, just like on the moon chain, which led to a disastrous situation where basically that whole globe, which was the expression of life on the moon chain, had to be closed down. And maybe more than that, maybe the inner principles had also to be closed down. You know, it's a bit like someone who suffers from some personal tragedy and they lose their home through fire. All of the place where they centralize their living is gone. And so the question comes, addressing a friend, can I move in with you? Well, that's basically what's happened. The Lord of the Moon chain, an extension of the planetary logos, has gained permission to move in with the Lord of the fourth chain. The chain that contains our fourth globe and the chain in which we are having our life expression. And there are so many moon chain lives which have moved in with us, and maybe we, many of us, are among those who have moved in to our friend's house. So it becomes necessary eventually to answer these questions. And before the student has what I might call the full freedom of the ashram. Let's just say there's a lot of protection of the ashram and of the students from their glamorous and illusory, and DK uses the word delusory or delusion, those qualities still residing in the student, but he is weaned away from them. So as we become increasingly decentralized, we do end up answering these questions, and hopefully we become clearer about our life task, and we find ways to carry it forward, and many character issues are solved and our purity increased. We become less conceited, less consciously conceited, and living more greatly with a sense of proportion, and we become preoccupied with the needs of the group and the needs of the many. All this kind of training can go on in the ashram. The ashram, you must remember, is externalized only insofar as it provides a point of spiritual tension. Entities are points of tension. Group entities are points of tension. And then from that ashram, disciples go out to work in the world, just the way those who had experienced the baptism by fire under the guidance of the Christ, they went out to work. I think sometimes 2 by 2, to spread the good news after they had been dowered with the gift of understanding in the upper room. So to what extent has any master succeeded in helping that plan go forward? Because we have been dowered with great information about the ageless wisdom, which is needed by those who are so stuck in the old religions and old, I use that word, crustifications, just the old ways, which no longer lead to the objectives possible for the modern disciple. So the ashrams, from the point of spiritual tension, go out to work in the world. The outer group working in the world, or the exoteric ashram, is externalized by reflecting the radiance of the inner group and by establishing a magnetic field of spiritual power. So we must always somehow be in touch with the inner ashram. Otherwise, we who, let us say, stand fairly peripherally to the ashram will never be able to reflect the radiance of the inner ashram. It's a question of higher points of tension coming through for the welfare of humanity. So we establish outwardly a magnetic field of spiritual power. This is done just insofar as the members of the ashram who are found on its outer periphery, such as, let's say, Master DK's accepted disciples, relate themselves to the inner ashram and therefore respond to the note and quality of the inner group gathered around the master. So what did DK say about the higher reflection of the split personality in the stage of Chela on the thread? I wonder how many of us give attention to the thought of the inner ashram and the quality and radiance and magnetism that they send forth. And I wonder how many of us know that we are intended to be exemplars of this inner ashram. Here, the definition of what an ashram is and isn't is beautifully, succinctly put forward in certain sentences. As I say, after long experience in the arcane school, I'm beginning to recognize where, or from where, some of the leading teaching sentences arose. The ashram is not a group of people seeking spiritual realization. Now that has to be significant. It's the state of mind of a spiritual group. It's not a place where long hours of silent meditation are pursued. And notice the word people, group of people. The ashram is a gathering together of those who are functioning as souls within a blended soul nature. Rather, what is it? It is a center of group activity, swept by energies which, when given full and proper sway, enable the group to carry out the master's plan and to meet human need. So, quite a different thing. A center of group activity, swept by energies which, when given full and proper sway, enable the group to carry out the master's plan. He is the monadic center of the ashram, and his conception determines the kind of expression that will come out of the ashram, and it's always to meet human need. So think about why you may wish to be in an ashram. What thoughts occur to you when you think about being drawn closer to the ashram by acceptance by the master and by continual interplay, such as is found in the stage of Chela on the thread? Well, we have to ponder on these things because we are, if we take full advantage of a book like this, Discipleship in the New Age, we are headed for participation in an ashram. And consider that Master DK's ashram is such a training ashram for disciples on various rays who have reached that point where they can be trained. Now, Master DK may take them in as accepted disciples, but they may be transferred at any point deemed wise to the home ashram in which they are a part. And it was this, what was his name? He was a Jesuit priest, and he did a lot of helping of Master DK. After his death, he was killed by the Nazis as part of a karmic situation that related to his participation in the French Revolution. But then, after some time of helping Master DK, because he was a second-ray soul, he was transferred to Master Moria, which was his true home ashram. He had obviously then the first ray monad, and I guess we can question somewhere with respect to Master Moria, the first ray monad must appear either on the monadic plane or the logoic. Human need. You may wonder, says the Tibetan, why I so constantly emphasize this need. I do it because that need is the main and urgent principle of invocation. I mean, when we are really fulfilling human need, we are allowed to invoke that which will help us fulfill the human need. I do it, says the Tibetan, because that need is the main and urgent principle of invocation. It can and will evoke hierarchical response and thus put two centers, that of humanity and hierarchy, en rapport. Probably what we cannot invoke, or at least get a response, an evocation for ourselves, we can do when human need is our preoccupying focus of attention. And that has been repeated a number of times in this stage of Chela on the thread. So the triangles, some of which we have seen, show the early days, middle days, and future days of the relationship between Shamballa, hierarchy, and humanity. They are not yet thoroughly en rapport, but they will be, and energy will flow in each triangle along each line of connection. So then in each triangle, there will be 6 energy flows once the completed relationship exists. This is not yet the case. So we're talking about putting humanity and hierarchy on rapport, but there's also Shamballa and humanity and Shamballa and hierarchy. So anyway, DK, in addressing what we learn about putting these 2 centers en rapport, he says, this is a group correspondence to the invocation of the soul by the personality and its subsequent evocation on the plane of everyday living. Thus leading to consequent fusion. Whoop. Okay, there we go. An ashram or master's group is therefore a center of invocation. And when the individual disciple becomes a Chela on the thread, it is the reward of selfless service carried forward at any personal cost. Now think about that. The requirements are getting more demanding, are they not? Then the ashram can be a center of unique world potency when it is filled with those who deserve that reward because they have engaged in selfless service. And then, of course, this is a powerful statement leading to the great renunciation carried forward at any personal cost. We're always told we have to count the cost. Count the cost of that in which we are about to engage, the service, the activity in which we are about to engage. What have been the costs in our life that we have counted? at any personal cost. Because we are on the path of the great renunciation, at which time the monad has a very powerful effect, and we leave behind concerns for our outer form and its customary well-being. Chelas on the thread, says the Tibetan, employ a peculiar technique according to their ray. Now, maybe we're not going to be able to look at every method of ray application. They work always through the head center, and there is a hint, a very, very big hint about how the call is sent forth, which arrests the master's attention no matter what he is doing, and hence the inhibition upon the Chela if he may not sound that call. Chelas on the thread employ a peculiar technique according to their ray, but the thing in common is that they always work through the head center. By means of this call, or by means of this center, and I guess he means the greater head center, they sound out the call, an inaudible call from the physical plane angle, which, vibrating along the thread, reaches the master. Well, right there, we are given one terminus of the thread. It seems to me then that this thread is connected to the head center. Will this also involve the ajna center? Perhaps we don't know. But it is an inaudible call in emergency situations and not generated because of personal distress. Now, these calls, these techniques, says the Tibetan, are, however, taught directly to the disciple by the master when he, the master, recognizes his Chela's right to the privilege. I cannot give these techniques direct to you when you are, quote, on the thread, close quote. You will inevitably have the information given to you. So the natural evolution of this very sacrificial service will put the Chela, who is the accepted disciple, on to the thread, and then the information by whatever means, comes to such a Chela. So there's no way to demand this information of anyone or of the master. Maybe the intuition will reveal it. We simply have to work with heart and mind aflame in service on behalf of the need of others, working with decentralization, impersonality, one-pointedness, and a unification of the two polarities. One found, as it were, in the hands of the master, but not really the hands, and the other apparently found in relation to the disciples' head center. This thread, says the Tibetan, is not the antahkarana, but a linking thread of living light. This the master projects as the disciples' service evokes a response from him, from the master. So there's an important distinction. The antahkarana passing from the astral body through into the triad and through that pool of retained soul energies. This is something different, but rather it is a linking thread of living light. And it links the master and the Chela. And note, the master projects this. It's not something that the disciple projects. No, not that. And it is a reward. And notice the term service. When the service of the disciple, as presumably as an accepted disciple, is sufficiently keen, helpful, ongoing, selfless, it evokes a response from the master. And the master will have to be the judge. What is our task? Our task is the service. Without interruption, without too much deflection. I mean, I guess every disciple deflects now and then, but has to all the more rapidly get back on the beam. So this evocation of a response from the master is the way this thread is established. A thread of living light. That's such a good way of putting it. A linking thread of living light. Yes. It doesn't do good for us to say, oh, I wish I were on the thread. Our service will prove our worthiness of being on the thread. And the master will not ignore the opportunity to place the disciple on the thread, because in so doing, he will have an even more efficient, helpful server in relation to him and to his ashram. This evocation, however, increases its potency as the disciple builds the antahkarana between the personality and the spiritual triad. So these processes are interdependent. And if we succeed in one, our chances of augmented success in the other are increased. These are all such subtle occult processes. So many people would not pay any attention to this kind of instruction. It's so intangible, apparently. It's so abstract, apparently. But for people like ourselves who are following the training that the Tibetan is offering, this is priceless information. The Chela on the thread eventually has the life thread, Sutratma, one aspect of the antahkarana, connected with this ashramic thread. Now that's really interesting. And hence the establishment of monadic control of the individual, which in group form signifies the control of the hierarchy by Shamballa. The lesser and greater relationship must ever remain in mind. So another piece of arcane information that the Sutratma, S-U-T-R-A-T-M-A, Sutratma, one aspect of the antahkarana, along with the consciousness thread and the creative thread, gets connected with this ashramic thread between master and disciple, and hence the establishment of monadic control. I guess we have to say that the Sutratma certainly has the monad, the living monad, as an emanating point, and hence the establishment of monadic control of the individual, which, let's expand it now, in its group form, signifies control of the hierarchy by Shamballa. It's a bit like the master being able to control his ashram. The master is the monadic point in his ashram, and the monadic point in relation to hierarchy is Sanat Kumara in Shamballa. So he gives us these analogies so we can always expand to the group perspective. I just, have to pause and say, look, friends, do we realize what we're being given here? Oh my goodness. The detail of the process which transforms us into conscious spiritual beings, not just latent spiritual beings, knowing that one day, yes, we will be spiritual beings, but gives us the tools right now to become these spiritual beings in full waking consciousness. I just got to say, I know this is a different process than when I typed it all out, sentence after sentence, and kind of gave my impressions. But as I go along here, I'm just impressed by the dowered treasure from Master Decay and from the higher members of hierarchy who gave him permission to impart all this. It's very uplifting. And no matter how you may be feeling within your personality, it does something. It lifts the whole process, and the personality more and more becomes the harmonized servant of the soul. And may that be the case for all of us. May we realize that that is what is happening, and we are stepping into Master Decay's world, which is filled with accurate, dependable, technical information about the safe way to follow through an inevitable progression through the 6 stages of discipleship, or maybe 7, as he indicates, the blending of the lights. Now, to the average aspirant, and remember, an aspirant can be positioned at many different many different points of tension. The implications of this stage of discipleship are valuable from the angle of emphasizing what has not been achieved. The implications are therefore negative, and this is frequently desirable where accepted disciples are concerned, whose attitude should be positive and intelligent. Well, we are faced with the sense that something lies ahead here. And even though we might be an accepted disciple, which is high enough in a certain sense, high compared to where we otherwise might be standing, still, the higher phases of accepted discipleship, which segue into Chela on the thread, have usually not been achieved. Well, DK said, I remember, some of you know how to reach me. Others of you have the ability if you but knew you had the ability, and others have yet to learn. So he may have been suggesting that in his group of disciples, there were a number of those who were Chelas on the thread. And actually, Foster Bailey seemed to suggest, when he said, I have consulted with Master DK, and he has assured me that there will be no atomic war. Now, this was in the early 1950s, but if he had, being a first-rate disciple, if he had consulted with Master DK, had some kind of exchange with him, then that situation of being on the thread certainly was activated. So if we become accepted disciples, he tells us we should have a positive and intelligent attitude. And if there is negativity regarding the step ahead, then we have to do that is what is required to segue under the Master's recognition into that next stage. We just recognize our limitations. The law of positive and negative relationships underlies all these stages. That which is higher is at first always negative to that which is lower. Then interim changes take place, which make the higher positive to the lower, and lead, therefore, to the steady ascending of the way of life upon the ladder of spiritual ascent. Well, I didn't realize that we were so close here to the end of this section on Chela on the thread. There's always a way for us to move into the next stage. Certain initiatives have to be taken by us. Let's say, in this case, service initiatives, but the Master is on watch. And when the service is adequate, the Master can send forth this linking thread of living light. And then the relationship is a new one, and the disciple becomes positive even to the stage he has left behind. Well, most of us are not yet accepted disciples. That is a coming stage. And now we're talking about a stage that is entered from high and experienced accepted disciples. The key thing, basically, is to serve with all our heart and mind from the right motive, not from the motive of spiritual advancement. That would be to put the cart before the horse. It's a loving heart recognizing human need, which is the propellant towards service. And when the service is genuine and ongoing and effective and the great motive in the disciple's life, then that linking thread of living light can be sent forward, offering even greater opportunities for service. Now, looks like we have quite a extensive section lying ahead of us. The Chela within the aura, and whoop. If I go up to volume 100, it will be unbearable. So this is page 749, and we had been continuing from 747. And not a lot of pages, but important regarding these questions and what a master tries to do with us when we first enter the ashram, and how we are to really look at ourselves and judge whether we belong at the stage where apparently we have reached. That is the stage of accepted discipleship. What an ashram is and isn't, and the invocation, what need is valuable for. It is the main and urgent principle of invocation. How much sacrifice is involved in this stage of Chela on the thread, and the head center always worked through by the Chela on the thread, always worked through the head center. Now, does he include the whole head center? Or is it a combination, so let us say, of head and ajna in some way? But it is a privileged position, this stage of Chela on the thread. And we don't exactly force our way into it. the service is the open sesame. And in such a book as this, he can't simply pour the techniques out. They could be misused because we see how much restraint is needed on the part of the Chela on the thread before he sets up a call in case of group emergencies and not of personal distress. It's the master who is projecting the linking thread of living light, and eventually the thread is linked up with the aspect, that aspect of the antahkarana we call the sutratma. And we've reached the point where aspirants are those who are going along at all these different stages of discipleship, but it certainly tells the average aspirant, who even may be an accepted disciple, what has not been achieved. But always there is a segue, and the positive, which was negative, the positive of the next stage takes over. Okay. So we have just done program 19. This is the 17th of June. We've done just a few pages. Like I say, I always have my hope that somehow I can do something a little later today, but there are programs and appointments and so forth, so that may or may not be possible. I guess none of this can be rushed, but we are told that in the rules of the road that though there is no rush, no hurry, there is also no time to lose. And so in that respect, we keep on keeping on, and we make haste slowly. The measured approach is given, and if we follow correctly, we are not likely to lose our balance. We are involved in a great enterprise, which in this life and in incarnations to come will make us more useful in bringing about the plans of Sanat Kumara for the Aquarian age. And we just have to have that type of gratitude, which recognizes that we have been offered the means of progressing. Now, what we do with it, what our sense of values is, how much we value these means, really, it's up to us. And along with that, the time equation is in our hands. But if we seize upon our opportunities, it will mean that others will benefit. And think of it. What if Alice Bailey had stuck with her kind of humorous statement, "I'm no darn psychic," when the Tibetan first contacted her. But she was fair-minded, and she did give his words, his teaching, a chance. And then, of course, how could she help but be impressed by them and their, I would say, very apparent truth value. So when we accept a heavier burden, as Master Moria would always have us accept, we are opening doors for others who will be able to go through those doors more rapidly and more securely than otherwise they might, especially if they wouldn't even be aware that such doors exist. So our responsibility as disciples is heavy, even as a Chela in the light. It's growing more burdensome, though it is, as Moria says, a joy to do the Master's work. And by the time we are accepted disciples, the responsibility to our fellow human beings is considerable. And onward it goes as we ascend into points of stages of discipleship which operate at an ever higher point of tension. Okay, I really would love to get into this next section. Can't do it right now. I'll just see what is possible. So, sometimes when fatigue comes upon you, you just know that you don't have the acuity you will need to say anything of real value. So hopefully I haven't done too many programs like that. But the fortunate thing is, we do read the Master's words. And no matter what I may do in trying to connect and round out and harmonize many different points, his words stand. So friends, Tuya and I wish you love and many blessings, and the entire crew, team, working in communications does the same. And maybe you, as these impressions become stronger and stronger, will do your bit to pass the word on to others so that the spiritual quality of their life can be enhanced. Okay, we'll get on to program 20 when I can, and see you before long. Bye.